Well, hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for this practice clinic. The idea behind this is just for readers of my blog and subscribers to the online academy to join me for to actually put forward some problems they're having with particular pieces. Hi everybody, nice to see you. Hit the like button, do the wow face, let me know where you're watching from. So as I was saying, I've got a few questions here from my readers, and I thought what I'd do is just jump straight in with those particular questions, and hopefully that I can give some sort of coherent answers and responses to them. So the first person who's asked me something here is Taj. I don't know where Taj comes from, but here is the question. Do you have any tips on how to learn pieces faster? As a more mature student and returning after a 20-year hiatus, it seems to take forever to get the notes down. Any suggestions? Selected pieces are too advanced. Do I choose simpler ones and do more of them, or simply practice more, as this seems to lead to more aches and pains? Well, as soon as I hear aches and pains, I do get a bit concerned, because piano practice should never cause any aches and pains, whatever, never. If you're doing something that's causing aches and pains, if I may venture to suggest, there's something not quite right there. So the problem with videos and presentations like this is they're not really able to address specific aches and pains problems. You need to go and find a teacher who could look at your playing and give you some assistance. But going back to the first part, do you have any tips on how to learn pieces faster? I feel, hello Anne, nice to see you. Anne's watching, and from Melbourne, how lovely. I love Melbourne, I've been there a few times. I absolutely love it, beautiful place. So do you have any tips on how to learn pieces faster? Yes, I think I do. I wrote a blog post called The Three Little Pigs, where I described the three kind of possible ways of learning a piece. One is the quick and easy way, where you just pick it up every day and kind of read it through and hope that the next day it gets better. And the other is a little bit more glorified than that. But the third approach, if you remember the Three Little Pigs, the third little pig spent ages digging downwards into the ground and digging foundations, so that when the big bad wolf came along, his house withstood the pressures of that big bad wolf. So I think the way of learning a piece is to do so really thoroughly. And I'm going to show you a few tips. I've just picked out something randomly here, Edvard Grieg's Arrieta. Do we know the Arrieta? Kind of intermediate level piece that a lot of people enjoy playing. So if I were learning this from scratch, what I wouldn't do is to jump straight in with bar one and kind of try and organise, fiddle around with bar one and then go on to bar two. I'd sit back a little bit, and I call this PPR, Personalised Pattern Recognition. It's a sort of analysis, but it comes from within rather than from some sort of textbook way of doing it. So the more theory and the more harmony you have, the more knowledge you have, the easier it is to do this. But you don't need formal education to do some of it. So here's what I would do. Sitting back, just looking at it, looking at the score. You can even do this away from the piano. What do I notice? Well, I notice that the top line, there's a top line with stems that go up, which is a melody line. Let me have a look at it. And as I look at it, as I sketch this, I might notice whatever I notice. Now I notice that there are 5 repeated Gs. At which point Grieg dips down one. There's a skip there, and then he comes back up one note to the F. Right, okay, so now I think I've got that pattern fairly understood. And then I notice the next 2 bars, he seems to do the same thing, this time from an F to an E flat. So that there's an idea of repeated notes, there's an idea of a pattern that falls down. That's already lodging in some part of my brain that is responsible for understanding shapes and patterns and designs, rather than just wiggling fingers in response to blobs on the page. The next thing I'd notice, and this is what I happen to notice, is that underneath there is a repeated E flat, a long E flat. So I can put those two elements together. And I'm listening to how that melody line interacts with the bass. Ah, there they go, they kind of come together at the end. The next thing I notice is a bunch of semiquavers or 16th notes, depending on which part of the world you're from, that kind of meander through. And let's say I was struggling to read that chord and I didn't really know what it was. The first one I can kind of see, yes, that's an E flat major chord. What's this one? Well, if I knew about diminished harmony, then I could say it's a diminished chord, diminished seventh. But if let's say I didn't know that and I wanted to try and find some way of making the transition from here. Thank you all so much for your likes and your wows and your hearts. Keep going with them. Let me know where you're listening from. I happen to notice here that the B flats in the first chord go up to a C flat. And what happens now? My interest is piqued. The thumbs go outwards. So I can either say it's, hello Joe, lovely to see you. I can either say it's a diminished seventh chord, or I can somehow relate it shape-wise to what I've had before. Do you see where I'm coming from with this? I'm not going note by note by note by note. I'm trying to find patterns that are meaningful to me. And I can put that together in another way. I can leave out the melody on the top and just play my bass line and my accompaniment. Very slowly to start with. That's not very slow actually, but I like the idea of the speed of no mistakes at the beginning, which is a tempo that enables me to play everything correctly. In other words, what we don't want is this sort of stuff. You know, great delays happening, they're looking up and down. Just chill with the tempo, take it way down. I can still aim for beauty of sound. I'm hearing every single note. I'm able to instruct the finger that has to go next exactly what it's got to do. And then I would stop, because when we practice we don't want to take in too much information at once. Hi Luis, nice to see you from Portugal. We want to try and work in bite-sized chunks. It's like eating, you know, if you put too much in your mouth you can't chew it, you can't swallow it, and it's uncomfortable as well as very impolite. So if we want to absorb music, just take a little bit at a time. I'm a great believer in one bar and one note. That's a wonderful way of learning, this sort of idea. Stop. And repeat if I need to, which I probably will. Hi Nabil, nice to see you. Then if I wanted to start on the second bar, I notice I've got a tied note in my bass, so I just put that note down silently. Now I'm starting from bar 2. I stop on the first note of bar 3, and I work on that until I've organised it beautifully, until it starts to yield with mindful repetition, and using the feedback loop, which you will find on the blog practicingthepiano.com. You will find there my feedback loop article, which shows you how to use mindfulness in your practice so that you're not just frustratedly wiggling fingers. I hope that's given you a few ideas about that subject of learning new pieces. Florence from Pembrokeshire, nice to meet you, Florence. So the idea would be the next day, go back and do those same things again, and again the day after. Sheila says, I'd like help in bringing out the melody line in repeated octaves. I'm learning Chopin's Raindrop Prelude, and the section starts off with one melody note in the right hand from bar 36. It gets more difficult with the double notes in bars 61 and 62. I find my hand starts to ache with the stretch. We don't like aches, we don't need aches. Let's go to the example that, you know, the Raindrop Prelude. How lovely is that, you know? But Sheila's referring to the middle section where the gentle rain, the A flat here, which has just been pitter-patter on the roof, suddenly turns into something a bit more threatening. You know, the G sharps. Salma says, I get bored from practice. Oh dear. Hopefully by the end of this I'll give you some ideas as to how you can practice productively. But coming back to this example, the section Sheila's meaning is here, bar 30, is it 36? Yeah, here, where the right hand has octaves now and a melody line in the middle. This bar, let me put it together with the left hand. Crescendo. Right, now, there's a lot to say about this, and I'll try and not spend too long on it. First thing I would do is, when somebody talks about, say, the right hand or the left hand, I immediately go to the other hand and see whether they've organised that hand. Because without a beautifully structured left hand, the right hand's going to be floundering on the top. So let's have a look at the left hand. Can you play your left hand alone beautifully? What are some of the ingredients of that? Well, I would go for a legato where I possibly can. So this means joining from the bass line. I have to release my thumb there. Here I can join both notes. I can slide my thumb from the C sharp to the B sharp. Have you ever wondered what these bevels are on the edge of the black keys? They're to enable you to slide off onto a white key. So I can slide down. I've lost my place. Here we go. Now I have to lift my fourth finger, but I can hold onto my thumb because I want to create legatos here. So I'm working on my left hand, creating a beautiful sound. Little suggestion here, don't change pedal. You don't need to change pedal. Change pedal on the G sharp, D sharp, the first one. Hold the pedal through, and it saves you a hiccup there. Louise says, my wrists start aching whenever I try the Hanon exercises. Well, it depends on how you're doing the Hanon exercises. Let me see if I can come back to that in a second. So having really organised my left hand beautifully, I might decide just to add those right hand melody notes to my left hand. Do you see what I'm doing? I'm doing the same sort of deconstructing, reconstructing that I did with the Grieg piece. That's given me the sound that I want. Now with the G sharps, how does this work with the repeated octaves? The first response I would give is mobility. If we're locking in the wrist, that's going to be really difficult. So what I would do, let me play from the C sharp at the moment where the C sharp comes in. I would be inclined to drop into the C sharp G octave, C sharp G sharp, and on the repeated octave, first of all, I would not hold on to that second finger unnecessarily. You don't have to connect it in the hand. The pedal will do that job. Come up a little bit here in the wrist. Do you see how small that movement is? Release, down, come up, up, up. Now I notice in this edition, in bar 38, the fingering is quite awkward. It's 3-4-3, as suggested by, I think this is my Paderewski. Now, you don't need to struggle with that. You could try 2-3. That already saves the hand a stretch. Stretches are what tighten us up, and locking is also what tightens us up. So do you see what happens there in the wrist? There's a gentle rise and fall here. Very small, and when I then put that together, it's a millimetre or two. It's the idea of just having a little bit of give here. I'm not talking about big movements like this. Small movements there. For practice, you could repeat the octaves more times than you need. And then... and just drop down when you want to play your melodic note. Now going to the next example, yes. So this is in bars 62 and 63. Chopin gives us this to play. It's quite awkward in the hand. Let me do that again. It's the G sharp I want to repeat. Actually, I think I need to go back a little bit here. there's a lot going on. So if I were to deconstruct that a little bit, what I might do is, can I play my top line just by itself? And make it sound beautiful, make it feel beautiful as well. There's the highlight of my phrase. Now what I could do next, maybe I could add the next note down, not the G sharp, but here I've got a C sharp to play. Can I play the top two notes? And do you see again how unlocked my wrist is? I'm just, as though I was spring-loaded. I'm got this image of a stagecoach, the sort of vehicle that the Queen might, or other important people might sit in, where underneath there would be this great big spring, huge great metal spring that goes from one axle to the next. And that's what enables Her Majesty to float. Can you imagine if she came to a hole in the street, and rather than being jolted up into the ceiling, the spring underneath would absorb the shock there. So the idea of the wrist being sprung rather than floppy, it's certainly not floppy, but the sense here, a little bit of give in the wrist, that stops me from tightening up. After that, maybe I could add my octaves. In other words, I'm playing everything except the G sharps now. Now let me play everything except the thumb, but including the G sharp. Deconstruction. To deconstruct that further, I might miss off the top note. I'm now playing from the bar after I started. It's like part playing, actually. Then you could work from the thumb line. Let me play from the thumb. What am I going to do? Let me miss off the top note but play everything else. Beautiful like that. Let me just give you one or two other suggestions. How about I increase the number of G sharps that I play? Double them up, release. Do you see how I'm releasing? At some point, I'm releasing the chord. So I'm not trying to hold onto my hand positions. I'm releasing I'm allowing my hand to close up a little bit to release. So, you could also do this. You could practice the chord, close, close. Just to keep the hand, again, the opposite of locked up. We want to avoid locking up. And the idea here is that you'd follow these processes the day after, and you do it the day after that. Until you started to notice, yes, now my hand is beginning to really sense those positions. I'm really able to release in my wrist. I'm not trying to hold on to the chord shapes. And if you should find at some point later, maybe a couple of weeks afterwards, you're starting to lock up again, go back to some of those ideas and process it again. Catherine, in Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata, it's all fine at a medium tempo, first movement. How do you maintain total evenness with the semiquavers, that 16th notes, runs, and arpeggio figures at a fast tempo, while trying to curve fingers 4 and 5 and wrist lateral movement? Okay, well, I'm not sure quite where you meant here, Catherine, but I've taken the second subject that starts in bar 23, because I think that's probably representative of what you're talking about. The second theme. That section there. So what I did was I had a quick look at this before the broadcast and just thought, what would I do if I were able to play it at, let's say, a medium speed? I want to shape that line on the top. So I'm giving it kind of micro crescendo diminuendo hairpins just to feel the groupings of the semiquaver 16th notes. In other words, I want to play it musically. I wouldn't want to play it mechanically. Now, but let's have a look at the mechanics of the left hand. You talk about keeping your fourth and fifth fingers curved. Right, well, if we look at what the left hand has to do, we've got spinning, literally spinning arpeggio patterns here. So what I'm sensing I need to do to keep that, or to enable that to work, two things actually. One is the fingertips are very active. So I would recommend a certain amount of staccato practice from the tip of the finger. So what the tip's doing is it's pulling or scratching. Can you see that? So that motion is completely liberating. I mean, I don't feel anything in the arm from that. But do you notice what's happening in the arm? I'm noticing that to get the best result out of that, I've got a couple of different ways of doing it. I could move laterally. Do you see the lateral movement there? Or I could convert that lateral movement into wrist circles and spin round this way. So I've either got this possibility, side to side, or this possibility, or I could feel the rotation from 1 to 5. 1, 5, 1, 5. That would also work very well. But I prefer, for myself, I prefer a very small wrist circle. So ways of practicing, since this is not supposed to be a technique workshop, it's supposed to be a practice workshop, which would be what does one do on an ongoing basis? Well, I think I would start off by missing out the thumb and making triplets down in the left hand. There's the awkward one, where the 5 and the 3 have to. In other words, if I'm to play B, F sharp with 5-3, I'd really have to make sure I'm mobilized. I can't keep that stretch in my hand. That would really tighten me up if I tried to do that. You see, I can't even begin to. As soon as I did that, I noticed my posture started to kind of hunch. So, you know, my sense there would be to move to the third finger. Do you see the circle there? It's a very small spin. Now, for practice, additionally, you could take the top 3, in other words, miss out the pinky and just play 3, 2, 1. There's triplets. Do you notice that? I'm not doing this mechanically. I'm aiming to give a little bit of shape to that. I notice harmonically there's a kind of crescendo to that block and then back down again. So there's a staccato nature to the touch there that's created by a very light leggero fingertip. Now, the other thing I like to do is to put accents in. So I would suggest accenting, first of all, the pinky notes, the notes that come on the first beat. Now, after you're comfortable with that it's nicely even, put the accent on the second note. So I'm shifting. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. On that until I were happy that it sounded good and also felt good. It's got to feel good. If I'm creating the right type of sounds but my arm is locked up, then that's no good. I'd want to really check in all the time with my body. Now let me put the accent on the third note of each group. So 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. I could practice that up a little bit and do that better, but for now, let me go on to the last note. So 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, accenting on the thumb. That's not a bad thing. Do you get the idea there? Now, putting it together, you've got two approaches really to take something from a slow tempo to a fast performance tempo. One is just incrementally getting faster. You find the speed that you can manage it at, and you might want to log that with a metronome and see, yes, I can play it at, what's that, 70, let's say, I don't know. Or you could do this, which I prefer, and it's chaining. So what I might do is to play just the first beat. You know, for those of you that remember LP record players and dropping the needle down on a record to find the spot in the track that you were wanting to. Erica, that's Erica from Pianist Magazine, my editor there. Lovely to see you, Erica. Dropping the needle down and you hear a sound bite, don't you, from a live performance with all the performance details. So what I do when I do this is I imagine the character, the sound, the dynamic that I want, the energy that I want, and I just play one sound bite, just literally dropping the needle and picking it up. Yeah, now if I should notice my left hand was tight, I'd focus now on releasing that tightness. Happy? Now I can go on. Now I noticed these notes weren't quite together, so I might stop. How about I stop in the middle of the beat? I can stop wherever I want. Yeah, now I'm happy that these are synchronizing. Yes, I can really feel the difference there. So now I've wound up on the third beat. Why don't I start from the third beat? Good, and I'm aware that my right hand is just a little bit firmer than my left. Happy, yes. Now I could either play from beat 4 over to beat 1, or I might tack on beat 4 to beat 3. See what I'm doing there? Then I've got a little chain from beat 1 to beat 3, and then I've got another little chain from beat 3 to the next beat 1. Then I could hook those up together. Those are that's the chaining idea. You could also do accents, which we did for the left hand, so I won't go through that process again. But you could do that again for both hands. How about accents in 2s? That really helps to synchronize those notes. Then accents in 4s. Let me take the bar 24 and just show you how you could shift the accents there. On accenting beat, the second note of each group, that's group the third. So some other ideas for this, it's not rocket science, but some rhythm work is very good. You could, if you wanted to do some dotted rhythms, fine. As long as you're doing them well, they can be very helpful at anchoring notes together. And then the other way around. But you'd have to make sure that the hands were really synchronized perfectly. Then in groups of groups of 4. Now how about this? Starting the group of 4 from the second note. And then from the third note, that really makes me have to focus. And then stopping on the fourth note, starting from the fourth note. That's working in groups of 4. Let me now work in groups of 8. So I'm now going to stop on the first note and then on the third beat. Get the sense of that? And I could start that from the second note of the first group. That wasn't quite together. That was better. I want to make sure those are synchronizing. A couple of other ideas. I very much like this approach, which is to play some component up to the speed and then another component half the speed. So that could be one beat. Let me just use that bar. You're going to be sick of this bar at the end of this. So the first beat slow. Rather enjoying that. And then reverse that. And those fast bursts that I'm doing are performance speed. So I'm mixing up fast playing with slow practice, but in a very controlled way. How about now I work in half bars? Let me do half bar slowly. enjoying this. My brain is connected up to my fingers. Then I do that the other way around, and I could work in bars. You get the idea there. And the point here is that there are lots of different approaches that you could use, so you need never get bored practicing. Somebody said they got bored practicing. Now I'm just remembering that somebody had said earlier about Hanon and you know, getting tight in Hanon. Well, whenever the word Hanon comes up, it's so divisive, because there are those, and I'm talking about elite concert pianists right at the top of their game, right at the top of the profession, who regularly practice Hanon daily. And there are those who, particularly teachers, who absolutely dismiss it as nonsense. It all depends on how you do it. So I don't want to get too stuck in this because I've covered this before, but let's say you're playing Hanon number 1. Do you see how mobile I am there with that? I'm not locking my hand. The tension will usually come from locking the hand or isolating the fingers when we lift the fingers like this, rather than to join up fingers with the arm. And I'm reminded of the great Leonid Nikolaev, I can't even say the word, Leonid Nikolaev, Russian, Soviet era Russian pedagogue, who said nothing in the finger without the arm, and nothing in the arm without the finger, which sums up piano playing. So it's a combination of what we're doing here, allied with what we're doing further back. I could go on for hours with this Waldstein example, but I won't, because there are other questions. Antal says, I'm learning a fairly simple piece and realised that forearm rotation and wrist circles can be utilised already in the first 4 bars. It would be very helpful for me if you have time to show it. It's the Mozart Minuet in D K7 from the short piano pieces from Mozart's childhood. Well, funnily enough, I didn't know this piece because it's not originally a piano piece. It's violin piano piece. So Minuet in D major, and I found it on IMSLP just now, and sure enough, the beginning is very much this kind of Alberti style bass. What do we do here? Yeah, I don't see in this example the call for any kind of wrist circles, but I do definitely suggest that you use the rotations on this Alberti style bass. So, see, there's a very good example of how the forearm assists the finger. So instead of, this would be the sort of finger lifting business, which gets people tight. Do you see what I'm doing there? Just lifting up each finger in turn, kind of the old way of doing things. Whereas what I'm proposing is the motion comes from the forearm. Can you see the forearm assists the finger in going down into the key? A couple of principles here. You'd want to make sure that your elbow was in one spot. You don't want to be moving around with the elbow, and you'd want to just make sure that your wrist was not dropping down. So nice level wrist. Now here's a good example of how we need to adjust inwards and upwards. If I'm going to put my pinky on the D sharp there, I'd need to make a little movement. I exaggerated it a bit, but do you see how I'm lifting up, moving in, adjusting my position? Because the black keys are higher up and further away, and if I'm wanting to put a short finger, that's a pinky or a thumb, on a black key, I'm going to need to adjust my position. Do you see how that works? So I hope that gives you some ideas there. It's, for me, certainly rotary movements, not wrist circles. Saeed, I enjoyed watching the rotation videos, and I'm trying to use it in my practice to avoid injuries, but also seem to advance faster in scales and such by using the drop and roll method. Okay, so for example, I enjoyed the chaining video that Graham did very much and felt that the scales were going so fast and effortlessly way beyond my expectation. Well, that's nice to hear. So then the question is, am I supposed to stick to one of these techniques or practice and use both interchangeably, provided there is no tension? Right, so let me see if I can unpack that question a bit. So the idea of the chaining, just for those that might not know what we're doing here, you would want, the chaining is this. So if you're wanting to take a scale and get it from the slow speed, this sort of speed, to the fast speed, you drop into the first note and just play 2 notes to start with, and then 3 notes, then 4. So that again is one gesture of the arm, 5 notes, 6. See how that works, and you can use that very profitably with arpeggios. That's 1 octave. Then add a note each time. Oh, I'm getting some nice comments, thank you. So what's this one? Some pain might be normal at first. No, please, Luis, no pain ever. Piano playing should never cause you any pain, promise you. So getting back to the question here about whether it's rotations or whether it's anything else, because there's no one right way to play the piano, as we all know. If you look at the great pianists, there's a coordination, really. That's really what it's about, is how do we coordinate these fingers with the rest of our body, with the arm, with the upper body. It all comes down to the whole body. I'm reminded of that spiritual, it's called dem bones, isn't it? That the thigh bone's connected to the shin bone, and the shin bone's connected to whatever it is, something else. So that it's all one. We're not separating this from anywhere else. So when I do my chaining, I can use my rotations as well. So there I'm just sensing that I'm enabling my rotations, but I'm not getting strung up on it. I'm aiming for one gesture. Now, chaining is actually a fantastic practice tool. We've talked about it a little bit earlier. Okay, Antal says, thanks a lot, Graham. Oh, Antal, yes, that was your question. You're welcome. Chaining, so let's say I'm thinking of the beginning of the fast section of the Pathetique Sonata that a lot of people like to play and a lot of people get stuck on. So I could chain like that. So what I feel I'm doing is, it reminds me of apple scrumping. You know, when you see an apple tree growing in somebody's garden and you're kind of passing by on foot and you see an apple you particularly like. You don't want to stand there and take forever, you just sort of go in like that. And well, I don't, but maybe I did when I was a child, that kind of sense. So what I'm doing is I'm just going into the keyboard and grabbing the first full speed. And when I'm happy that that's working, I add one more event, 2 more events, until I've got the full chain. I can also work backwards. What is this backwards? So that's going from the end of the chain back to the beginning. So if I wanted to keep my practice exciting and vibrant and playful, because it needs to be playful, what I could do is to one day do the forwards chaining, and then perhaps the next day or sometime later in the day go back and do it the other way around. Lawrence says, I'm studying Chopin Opus 25, which one? And I have small hands. Left forearm always gets tense and painful. Do you mean, oh, number 1, sorry, Chopin number 1, Opus 25, and I have small hands. Left hand forearm always gets tense and painful. Well, so that's this etude. Do you see what's going on in the left hand there? Mobility. So what I'm doing with that extended arpeggio is not trying to hold an open position. What I'm doing is, oh, we've got another good question here. Let me see if I can get to that afterwards. Do you see when I come back to my pinky, my thumb comes back to join the hand. I want to avoid a stretch. So, and again, I can map that in one of two ways. I can either move laterally. Do you see how my wrist, this movement, the wrist is coming from, steering my hand from here, then back. Or I could convert that movement into something that's circular. It's not actually a circle, it's an ellipse. But you could, there's no way you could play that with a stretched out hand position and not be tense. So maybe that's what you're doing. So Chia says, is it normal to curl my fifth finger when I play scales and arpeggios? No, not really. I wouldn't. Well, when you say curl, do you mean curl up like this? Yeah, that's a very common issue there. I did look at this a little bit in last week's presentation, if you can find it on practicingthepiano.com Facebook page. You know, it's usually a sign of tension, a tug of war within the hand. So you can do all sorts of things about it. It's not really supposed to be a technique clinic, but just briefly, let's say you're playing a scale. Stop on each note of the scale and just command your pinky. This is your servant, this pinky. Just ask, well, you could command it or you could ask it very nicely. Just make sure that it's on the surface of the key before you move on. Are my fingers loosely on the keyboard rather than pulling up like this? It's a very complex thing because it could be a variety of different reasons. But you know, do occasionally do some forearm drops into the keyboard with any finger you want. Just land, and just make sure as you've landed, when you land, that all the other fingers are switched off. So this is what I think this is what you mean, isn't it? This sort of thing where this pinky comes up here. Have I answered that question now? Yeah, so the chaining is you can use whatever particular technique you're doing and chain. Aldrich says, what's the proper fingering when you would like to do 2 to 3 octaves for the left hand? I'm not quite sure what you mean, Aldrich, there. The proper fingering, maybe you could get back to me with that question and just make it a bit more specific. 2 octaves, are you talking about the Chopin or a scale? I'm not quite clear what you mean there. Let me see if I can come back to it. Lee asks, can you please suggest some tips on practicing Chopin's nocturne in B flat minor, that's the first nocturne, especially the polyrhythms in the right hand and how to practice them, hands separately and with the left hand. Yeah, okay, polyrhythms. This is the nocturne that Lee is meaning, this one. So far so good. I think that's the section that you're referring to. Oh, scale. Let me come back to you. The polyrhythm here, what we've got is 11. It's funny what you remember, isn't it? I can remember as a child, just as I'd started playing the piano, I wasn't a child, I was a teenager. But my teacher had a book of Chopin nocturnes, and she showed me, and I looked at this thing, all these 22s and 164s, however many, and I thought, how do you do that? It seems impossible. What's difficult about it is not so much playing the notes at the speed. It's only that speed, isn't it? What is that? You wouldn't want it to be any faster than that. It's coordinating it with the other hand, because you've got here a group of 11, then a group of 22, which is just divisible again by 11, isn't it? You'd say it's 11 plus 11. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. Let's say you did this, you divided 6 in the left hand into 11. You'd notice you've got almost, well, let me just try it. Now I've got an annoying group of 3 at the end, triplet. So I could just organize it that way, 2 for the price of 1, 2 against 1, then a 2 against 3 at the end. which would be absolutely fine, and a lot of people are actually playing like that. But let's say I didn't want it to sound so strict. I could, in my practice, move that triplet group elsewhere within the 11. So there it was at the end. But what would it feel like if I put it at the beginning? What would it feel like if I put it on the second left-hand note? Now let me shift it along one more. Do you get the idea? So if I practice a bunch of very controlled, precise realizations of that polyrhythm, I could then, in the final analysis, just let it go. I don't know what I'm doing there from the point of view of which note comes with which other. The whole reason for a composer to write such a polyrhythm is surely to blur the edges. If he'd wanted it to sound precise and clean and neat, he wouldn't have written in such a way that almost no notes come together with the other hand. So a 6 against 11 means that the hands are kind of not together except at the beginning. I hope that addresses that question. It's, you know, I'm reminded of the Fantasy Impromptu. But just before I get onto the Fantasy Impromptu, Aldrich says the C minor scale. Well, okay, the standard fingering is as a long group, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then a short group, 3, 2, 1. Long group, 4, 3, 2, 1. It would be the same whether you did it 1 octave, 2 octaves, or 3 octaves. That's the standard fingering. So a short group, short groups and long groups in alternation. If it does help to notice where the fourth finger goes in a scale. Oh, I'm getting some nice wow faces. That's always good. Oh, a couple more. Good. Keep putting the wow faces up. I like the look of them. My fourth finger shows up only once per octave. In this instance, it's on the D. 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 So I could anchor my fourth finger on the D. But I was going to just finish up this polyrhythm malarkey with the Fantasy Impromptu, because I do have something I could show you for that, which I think is very, very helpful. Jane, great stuff on polyrhythms. Thank you. So nice to see you. So when we've got the Fantasy Impromptu, we've got a 4 against a 3, which if you did it super slowly, it's possible, but there's no great value in practicing polyrhythms too often slowly, because you're not going to ever be able to hear. See, a 4 against 3. That's a 4 against 3. Yum pada pum padam pum pada pum padam. That's how it comes out sounding. But this is a really neat way. Let me take this group. So this is where you need a metronome. Those of you that know me will know I'm not a great fan of the metronome. It's useful here. So you'd set it. And you'd alternate one hand with the other. So you'd start off. Oh, thank you, Kira. Thank you. Nice comment. You'd start off by physically feeling, pa-pa-pa-pum, pa-pa-pa-pum, and then in the right hand. And you'd alternate until such time as you felt brave enough to try it together. The first time you try it together, it will go wrong. The first time you if you remember riding a bicycle, the first time you got on your bicycle, you probably fell off. And then you get on it again and you try again. And after a while, your brain will learn how that works, and you will coordinate it. It's harder to use that here because the groups are a bit too long. Right, now Tony says, I am learning Brahms Intermezzo in A, opus 118, number 2, and get very stuck with the section from bar 63. My teacher keeps telling me that the rhythm in bar 68 is all wrong, but I can't seem to fix it right. Could you help me, please? Bar 68 is this, right, let me just play the section that you're referring to. This is a kind of miracle piece. It's actually really, really miraculous. What Brahms does the first time this music comes, the top line, it's in 3 voices, isn't it? The top line has this melody. And the middle line has a counter melody, and the bass line just has triplets. What happens here is he inverts that. So now the middle line, which is shared between the 2 hands, I can't resist singing it. And I think that's the spot you're meaning, isn't it? Where the left hand has these duplets. That's the only place in that section where the triplet, duplet, the triplets stop. So what you need to do first is to hear this line by itself and actually practice it by itself. And again, never mechanically, do it always beautifully, do it with phrasing and good sound. I didn't want that accent, apologies for that accent. I'm trying to sound like a viola here. I get a kind of autumnal dark chocolate viola colour in my ear. How about I put that line with the triplets underneath, but I don't put my top voice on there. And I'm sure that that's what you mean. Maybe you haven't heard this line in its full glory. See, what you could then do would be to play the middle line, middle voice, together with the upper. Okay, excuse me, I'm just trying to look and see what people are asking. I'm going to now play the middle line with the upper line, but I'm missing out the triplets in the bass. Crescendo, I'm missing my crescendo. See, if you did that, there was no way that you would play them unrhythmically, because we're not actually referring to the triplets at all. Now, this is the sort of thing that great artists could spend hours in their practice room. They would be listening for tonal balance between, say, the top line here, which is marked piano. Brahms gives an extra piano for this line. It's not the main line, it's a secondary line. So what I would do when I practice that line by itself, let's see if I can float the sound. And certainly I want the last note of that to be really soft. And here again, stronger and then lighter. Can I do that when I add my middle voice, which I want to be slightly firmer? Let's say my middle voice begins, mezzo piano. So I'd want this line to be a little firmer than the top line. And have I done that beautifully, you know? Have I shaped that line beautifully? What I'm doing when I practice is using my ear. Always using my ear, always. There's never a moment where we just mechanically wiggle fingers. And then when you put that all together, how about just really focusing your attention on that middle line? So I'm working with the sound that I want, and I noticed that I'm using the similar kind of process at the end of this as I did at the beginning, which is deconstruction, deconstruct, reconstruct. There's so many examples of that I could give you. How about the E flat nocturne? You know, this is a piece that people love to play, and they often struggle with the left hand there. How does this work in the left hand? Well, I'm noticing, apart from my melody up here, which is self-evident, and I'd work like mad to get that to sound like a singer. Beautiful control of tone there and shaping, just like a singer would. But what's the left hand made up of? I notice there's a bass line down there. So see what I'm doing there? I've just omitted my middle element. But if I go back to my middle element and I just play it by itself, I notice something there, that without that big jump down to the bass register, I can relate one position to the next. So stripping it down, taking the top with the bottom, the middle with the top, and the middle with the bottom would just be playing left hand by itself. So these are deconstruction, reconstruction practice techniques. I think that's probably the end of this. Yes, it's the end of the questions as I had them in from you. So perhaps I should just now, unless there are any other questions, I can't see any other questions there. If I haven't addressed you individually, I will in the comments afterwards just go over your questions and see if I can come up with something that would be helpful. Any other questions you may have may very well be answered by my blog, practicingthepiano.com. If you go on the site, you will find that there's a search bar at the top. Just put in any old question you want, and hopefully there will be a number of blog posts that pop up that would address that question for you. And if not, we will be doing more of these at some future date in the not too distant future. So, you know, keep those questions brewing, write them down, and then submit them to me, and hopefully I'll be able to get to more of them next time. So I think that's probably me done for the morning, and I will wish you a very pleasant afternoon wherever you are watching from. It's trying to be sunny here in Wimbledon. It's not being very successful, but the sun is out now, so I think I'm going to take a little walk and have some lunch. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you hopefully very soon. Take care, everyone.